Hey there, Groovesters, Groove Stars. Ridgely here with another Lessons from the CEO, and I'm super delighted to be joined by the founder of Sage Moxy, and we're going to find out what that is in just a minute. Peter Luxruel, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us. I know this conversation is going to go a little deeper than I usually do. So tell us about your journey first. Where did it all start? How did you get to founding Sage Moxy, and a little bit about what that's all about? But take us back a little bit. How'd you get going? Were you originally on corporate? Where were you?
Excellent. Well, thanks really again for this opportunity. I think for me, it's difficult to talk about myself because I spend most of the time talking about, esoteric types of things. But, yeah, once in a while you ask the question, go back into your background and share. So I can give you a snippet of, my, so to say, his story. So essentially, I started in management consulting, and what I was doing back then was providing IT solutions to small and mid-sized companies, corporations. And from consulting, I chased, my MBA after my undergraduate, and I wanted to do something different. So I moved into finance, and I was financial analyst working for one of the pension funds here in Canada. And then, one day I was just doing reports, financial analysis, and I don't know if it's happened to you before, but I just had an epiphany.
Hmm.
Everything, everything just froze. Like everything froze. Everyone was walking around me. You know how offices are with cubicles? And I had my own cubicle, and I just stood up and everything froze in time. And I was like, what am I doing here? This is a waste of my life. Am I gonna do this for the rest of my life? What value am I contributing to the world? And from that time I knew I had to leave. But there was that struggle not to leave because, mortgage finance and all that stuff. But one thing led to another, and I eventually left. And during that time, I had a lot of questions, and my questions really were to find the truth of existence. I wanted to know, I mean, I grew up Christian, but I wanted to understand. I knew that I'd read outside of the Bible. I knew there were things that were, beyond the scope of the Bible in terms of our origins. And, so doing a lot of research from the esoteric perspective, using most of the Vedanta, Vedic types of philosophies or Western, Eastern philosophies, more of the Oriental philosophies, and applying that more so in transpersonal psychology. And transpersonal psychology looks at the human holistically. So as opposed to conventional psychology that's just looking at the mental aspects of being, transpersonal psychology is looking at the psycho-spiritual aspect of being. So then it's encompassing all of the aspects to find out the root cause of any, manifestations.
And
So
that's a deep transition, man. Hold on. You're walking through the hall, the office, and you're looking at the cubicles, and you stand up and say, I'm out of here. I'm going to go figure out the meaning of how. I mean, what? Tell us a little bit about that shift. I mean, to go from that place of analysis, numbers, to esoteric, what most people would consider esoteric, me not so much, but most. What was that like? I mean, had it been building up for a long time, or what? Because it couldn't have been just, oh, one day I woke up and decided to leave, right?
yeah, yeah, for sure. It has been, every one of us we have these habits or what should I call them? Hobbies. And it was just like a hobby to read and research, these areas of life. I'd when I was younger, I'd read the Bible like three times cover to cover, and it's like, no, there's more. And because the Bible referenced some other books, then I read those other books. They are called the Apocrypha books. So I read the Apocrypha books. I was like, there's more. Then I read the books of Enoch. There's more. I kept reading and searching and going to, more ancient types of texts like, I'm sure you know the Kabbalion and things like that. or Egyptian Book of the Dead. So, anyways, just going backwards, just trying to really research the essence of our being. So I've been doing this like on the ground, but to really make it clear for you, like why for me there was a distinction. I think there was also a time in my life where it was very, very strong in me that something was different for me than everybody else. And I'll explain it like this to you. When we had our graduation in college, um, my colleagues and my classmates were all partying and enjoying that night. We have this after party and all that. And I couldn't attend the after party. I was at home in the bedroom crying because I realized, like, I looked at my parents' lives and I said, so what is life but just to walk till the end? Snuff me out now. It's like, just
Yeah.
take me out.
Wow. So
I
you're
was
like,
like,
I'm done. I don't want that life. Whatever the life that I'm
yeah.
going to get it is, it's not that.
And like, it didn't make any sense to me that we can be born and then we just do that for the next something years and then retire. It's like, a human is born for way more than that. And that's why I've been searching for there must be more to our existence than just, come, walk, and pass away. It's not possible. Like no creation that can create something just to like walk and pass, use your whole existence, all the gifts and all the creative abilities that we have just trapped in us, and then for 60 something years, people we just so, anyways, that was for me, I think, when I was like maybe 18, and then it happened to me then that there was more to our existence than just to contribute, economically. There's something else you're supposed to do. But you know what? I fell asleep. I just, university and
Mhm.
followed the rat race until, at the point in the pension fund when I had the epiphany. So on the ground, I've been searching. I've been reading and searching for, going deeper. As I read a book and it references another book, I read that book and, just keep going deeper and deeper to find the truth.
I love that. I mean, and it's not necessarily the path that most people would take. So when you think about that and then moving into the world of entrepreneurship on some level, what do you think are the characteristics, the top couple of characteristics of the most successful people that make that transition?
Yes. It's quite interesting that what I understood from my journey is there's another aspect of our lives that we don't talk about. We focus on one aspect, and that's the external, and we don't focus so much on the internal. So when we talk about what characteristics, make a successful CEO or entrepreneur, it's the internal characteristics, first of all, not so much as the external, because again, the external is secondary. It's a manifestation of the internal. So we then break it down. So what type of internal characteristics are the most critical or important or fundamental for a living thing in existence to have? It's the knowledge of self. So first of all, is self-knowledge, self-realization, to understand the self. And then the second one is the principles that exist within the self. Because the self cannot exist without some form of principles that puts everything together, the laws and the principles that exist. And so when an individual or a CEO or whoever in any category of life understands or is self-realized, at the same time understands some of the fundamental principles that brings together existence, they're prone to succeed because they're able to work out at the most optimal or efficient way as possible. As opposed to assumptions or presumptions, they are clear and they're purposeful and they're intentional. So they are no longer unconscious.
And
So
how
that's
often do you find, I mean, because I think there are so many people who are walking around largely unconscious. Your thoughts on that?
that's I think, to be honest, it's evolution. We cannot go through an evolutionary cycle without being first of all unconscious. It's like, you know, a baby has to crawl first before, you know, the baby walks and then runs and maybe flies, for example. So when you think about the evolution of consciousness, consciousness starts from a place of unconsciousness, then consciousness, then superconsciousness, then cosmic or universal consciousness. That's how consciousness is meant to expand. So humanity, we're at a point where we're crossing between that unconscious to conscious, some of us conscious, some of us unconscious. And it's just evolution. It's just part of evolution of our civilization. We go through those phases. And so at this point, yeah, those who become more conscious actually instigate or ignite consciousness among the unconscious. And so, yeah, that's, you know, how the energy begins to spread. And eventually the planet will ascend, or the planet, the vibration of the planet will also, you know, be raised in that way.
Let me ask you about that, you know, the concept of igniting that in others. Do you think that that's a natural evolution, a purposeful intention, or what? Somewhere in between? In other words, the person, like I happen to be one of those people. Literally, tomorrow I will be preparing for Sunday. We are having a youth festival at our home, inviting youth from all over the place to just come and be and hang out and play games and talk to each other and have a dialogue, because they missed that during the pandemic. For me, it is very intentional. Now, maybe it evolved from studying, meditation, chanting, all the things that I've done. I don't know, but it feels like there's a lot of people that say they practice certain things, but they're really kind of only halfway there. And so I wonder if this evolution you're speaking about, is it a natural thing or is it an intentional thing based on somebody saying, I want to make this happen?
Yeah, that's the question of free will, right?
Yeah.
And so free will is like you have a box of infinite possibilities in a box, and free will says choose among these infinite possibilities, right? So it's a function of free will. Like there's no lord of, you know, government who says that you must or you must not be conscious or unconscious. Like everything in creation has, you know, a function of choice. That's why it exists, to have desire and to choose. So again, yeah, if some people realize that the conscious side of life is actually much of less of a suffering because it doesn't have duality, then they switch over to the conscious side as opposed to the unconscious. Because when we're in the unconscious, we suffer because of duality. Duality essentially means good and evil, left and right, hot and cold, up and down. So it's when an individual has the understanding of the advantages of being on the conscious side, perhaps they might think about crossing over to the conscious side.
And if you were to define those for the people who are like, man, that sounds great, but I don't get it. What are the advantages to stepping over to the conscious side?
Yeah, so duality essentially means that when we live in duality, we are entangled, enmeshed in, people call it the matrix or Maya or the illusion. If you think about it this way, if you try to find yourself within yourself, you can't find, you know, a hard drive and bring it out and say, here I am. You know, this is me. You realize that all you are, if you keep going back and back and say, who am I? You realize that you're just something observing what's going on. And based on thoughts that come, you know, you attribute meanings to those thoughts. That's all we are. Fundamentally, we're just observing, we're just awareness. And thoughts are rising. So that's when we decide to take our awareness away from the external and we bring it inwards. Okay, so what are the advantages? Back to your question. When we are unconscious, awareness is external. And it means that awareness is entangled in the physical reality. So it suffers. When something goes wrong, it suffers. It has pain and it has pleasures. Why? Because the fundamental truth about the desire for pleasure is that it contains the fear of pain. So then the individual is going to experience both because the desire is externally and the self-identification is based on an object. It's not based on the subject, it's not subjective truth. So then suffering is inevitable. And that's why some of the advantages of crossing over is that we don't suffer because even though you might experience duality, you are neutral to duality because you understand that nature takes its course. And you also understand that everything that comes to you, it's yourself bringing it to you. The reality is that as each one of us being a piece of a creator, it means that we are all creators of our own realities. We can't deny that. You tell someone that, oh, if you're going through something, you created it for yourself. And it's like, no, I didn't because that other person you're trying to blame. No. If we experience something, it means that we have drawn it to ourselves. We've magnetized that experience to ourselves, right? So when we understand that the self is bringing the experience, we have to learn from the experience, and we don't suffer because we understand the nature of the self. We don't identify with the object, we identify with the subject, the observer of experience, the unseen seer.
And how do you coach someone to cross over? How do you, even when somebody expresses that, so they hear you, Peter, and they say, wow, I wish I felt that way. How do you make that crossover? Or how do you help people make the crossover?
Well, that's part of the things that I'm working on strongly now. That historically, it takes time for a person to actually become fully conscious from the state of being unconscious. It could take years, except, those people who have profound realizations. Sometimes you have spontaneous realizations. But what I'm working on three aspects. I call it gradual, accelerated, and instant. So instant Buddha, gradual enlightenment, and accelerated enlightenment. So people can choose three paths to consciousness. But again, if you ask about training, the fundamental training about becoming conscious is essentially understanding the unconscious or understanding the imperfections in the self. It's gaining metacognition. The individual has to train to get metacognition, and when they gain metacognition, then they can identify the imperfections in the lower self using the higher self or using the higher mind. So that's part of the training at a high level, but we break it down into different types of what they call it skill sets or different types of meditations, esoteric exercises, stuff like that, to enable people to have experiences that make them know the self. So there's a very big difference between having, knowledge and having understanding. Sometimes we just have a knowledge or intellectual knowledge of something, but when we have the true self-knowledge, it's because it's experiential, and that makes a person have realization.
So tell us a little bit about the journey of someone that you've worked with. What does, pick anybody, and you don't have to give their name or anything, but what has that been like? What is it like to work with someone? And then what do they experience as a result of that?
That's a good question, and the only way I can answer that question is use myself as the so to speak, the client. So what the journey is like, to be honest, it's not an easy journey. It's one where a person has to say, I am willing to, and that's why in the olden days it's called the hero's journey.
Mhm.
Because let me put it this way. Just imagine you're an artist, Da Vinci or any famous artist, and you've drawn something beautiful, and you're told that you need to destroy this thing beautiful. You need to critique it and look at its imperfection and eventually maybe just get rid of it. That's what it means to go through the hero's journey. It's to begin to find the finite side of the self I can put it this way. See, all of us grew up in a family, right? And in that family we grew up in, the knowledge we gained from that family was not infinite, was finite. We only learned few aspects of the whole of humanity, perhaps the whole of existence, just because we're in that family. We didn't gain knowledge about, ancient civilizations, pre-Lemurian, civilization, Atlantean, whatever. We didn't gain other knowledge because that's our exposure, the parents, and. So the point is that if our finite being is really only a product of its experiences, it cannot be trusted. Why would we trust something that is finite? If someone asks you, hey, have you tasted um, ceviche, made with oyster, for example? If I ask you myself, what is that? Because you might not have had the experience. And that's the nature of our being, that we don't have infinite experiences. We have finite experiences, especially when we're unconscious. When we become conscious and superconscious, then we are connected to the transpersonal self, so we can have finite knowledge. But essentially, to answer your question, is that we understand that each one of us, our physical form is not perfect. And awakening is to identify the imperfect nature of our finite self. And that makes us then awaken to our true self on a scientific, level.
And to go through this, I mean, it sounds a lot like mentorship, like someone almost has to be mentored by someone else to help them, because most people, Peter, are not willing to do the amount of work that you did, right? To go back to read the Bible 3 times cover to cover, to read the Kabbalah, to do all those other things, but they might be willing to tap into the experience of someone like yourself who has gone through this, and dialogue in the form of a mentorship kind of relationship. What do you feel about that?
Yes, that's of course a path. There are many paths, and it all depends on the maturity of the soul, or what we call LOC, the level of consciousness of the soul. Yeah, some souls that are more advanced need to be mentored because they're already like at the tail end of, crossing between the bridge of unconscious to conscious. So mentorship is fine, but like some souls, if they are still in the unconscious, then they would need to develop discipline, the discipline first, meditation and excuse me, consistent practice of realization. So they have to go through the process in order to reach, the level where they are becoming more conscious. For example, an athlete will be someone who is closer to the conscious than the unconscious, right? Because the person is working to understand the self, focusing on the body, focusing more on the internal in as opposed to the external. And so people who are at the level where their awareness is typically more 80%, is supposed to be like 80-20, but let's say a person who is like 60-40, is getting there in terms of their awareness is more internal than external. Well, an individual whose awareness is constantly external, and an individual whose awareness is constantly external is always an individual who is connected to the material, to form. They typically believe in form, and they typically believe that they are a form. But those whose awareness are internal, they believe that they are something using a form is different. They understand that, oh, I'm just a thing using a form. Um, so yeah, it depends again on that level of consciousness. If a person is still at the initial stages where the awareness is external, they can't be mentored. They have to go through discipline. They have to go through the exercise of self-discipline until they reach a place where they're becoming more conscious and they are becoming more internal than external. Then they can be mentored and cross over to consciousness if they want to take that path. But even the path of unconscious to unconscious can actually be done by the self, because in reality it's supposed to be the self teaching the self. That's what it means, because it's the higher mind through the intermediary teaching the lower mind, and that's how consciousness is formed. So it can actually be done even without mentorship, but it takes that commitment and that discipline and that realization of why. So we always ask why.
So in that regard, you personally went through a journey of tremendous reading and searching and looking. Would you recommend to others that kind of personal development, find books that talk to you, etc., as part of this process?
Yes. And I don't think anyone who is a serious seeker would not be reading and researching. Like, I mean, if someone realizes that something in our reality can change, it shouldn't be this way, you start to search for answers to the problems of humanity. Like, there is a problem and there's got to be a solution to the problem. And so trying to find the solution, makes you start to read more materials, right? And then, yeah, so if you ask me what materials, I'll say, first of all, a person has to allow themselves to be the self-teacher and let the self-guide. But I have some materials that, I believe that I can suggest, things that are esoteric in nature, like the Tao Te Ching, and then they can talk about things that need to be like the boundary between the esoteric and the psychological. And you're talking about books like Psycho-Cybernetics by, Maxwell Maltz, and also books like Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. So, and those books are good because they focus and they get the individual to start going internal. Dao De Ching by Lao Tzu talks about some of the principles we can understand about the ego, we can understand about cause and effect, karma, those types of things. And then from a more modern perspective, you're talking about Maxwell Maxwell Maltz book, Psycho-Cybernetics, that talks about this aspect of ourselves that is not the unconscious, is conscious, that enables us to utilize more of our being. And then Daniel Kahneman, in his book, he talks about it and refers to it as System 1 and System 2. And System 1 is biased, and System 2 is the one that's more thoughtful, and how do we activate System 2 and all that. So everyone is fundamentally touching on the same thing in different ways. But, for us to then begin to say that this is a thing that we need to take seriously, because living in the unconscious is not a good thing. That is why we have the challenges in the world. The ego is the construct of the unconscious, right? So, the point is that we have to then do the research and figure out how then do we propagate, and proliferate the idea of being more conscious, or consciously, the expansion or the evolution of consciousness amongst our civilization.
I love I mean, I've not yet read the book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And if you could summarize that a little, tell us a little bit about what that means. Because at first glance, well, whoa, what do you mean thinking fast and slow? Tell us the point kind of behind those two, what seem to be paradoxical, but they're not.
Okay. The best way I can explain it is to give, an allegory of, how typically we humans function. Um, so let's say you see, um, how does the story go? Oh yes, this is how the story goes. I think it was a lady who, a guy was holding her handbag and running, for example, and the lady was maybe staying in a particular space, and we observed a particular story. But let me change that story, because that one might be a bit too complicated. The point is this: when we have some experiences in life, typically we rely on our past memories, occipital lobe, midbrain, in order to understand that experience. You cannot have an experience and you don't have any meaning to that experience. It's either I'm hungry, I need to go to shower, I need to go buy some food. Every experience has a meaning because we've experienced them before, right? And because we are people who like to make life simpler for ourselves, we automate life. And the example I'll give you that is clearer is you take a teenager who is learning to drive. and she's just learning to drive. It's like, oh, you know, very careful, and it's a shift stick, for example. And maybe after 6 months, you see her, maybe she's thinking, what do I get for dinner? And, you know, she just drove from work to, you know, home, and like, oh, making all the turns, stopping at the right, you know, lights and everything. She has created an avatar, a personality that knows how to drive, while she is the real her is able to ponder, what do I do for dinner? Or what am I going to do tomorrow? How does my boss feel? And she might make all the turns and get home without even realizing that, you know, there was a lady who passed by her and that was her friend, for example. She didn't see her. She was not conscious of her friend waving at her, for example. And that is what it is. That's how we actually function. We automate aspects of ourselves so that we can exploit the mundane aspects, so that we can be busy doing the more serious things. And we did that while we were growing up as children. We're just like, okay, this aspect is too easy, you know, okay, drinking milk, mastered it, you know, that one mastered, and that's how we're creating a personality. That one I don't like. And by doing all those, we're actually automating our being, creating our personality that can function without us thinking. So the book Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow is talking about that system one that is unconscious. It reacts if you go to the restaurant and say, what do you want to have for lunch? Like, oh, you know, I want to have, because you've always done that. You know, it's always on that automatic autopilot kind of mode. Whereas the system two is more thoughtful. It's like, you know, when someone asks you, what's your salary expectation? You know, it's like, hmm, you know, so system two is now more, you know, thoughtful and more conscious. And so we're trying to say, how then do we function more in the system two and less in the system one? Because the system one contains a lot of bias. You know, you have an interview and you have, you know, different candidates, and one candidate comes in and, you know, she looks like your daughter or looks like her, just, you know, unconsciously it's like there's something that connects me with this candidate. I like the third candidate. And the other person might say, oh, that candidate was drinking a bottle of Coke. I really love Coke. I want the second candidate, you know. So all those biases come in play in decision making, unconscious bias. So the more we become conscious of our being, the more we're actually thinking, or the more we're actually aware and awake. We're not unconscious, we're not using the unconscious side in our living, so we're not actually living. And that's what it means to gain self-realization, to be awakened, is to let go of the unconscious and become fully conscious and awakened.
So, Peter, kind of a curveball question, but what do you think is the role of AI with all of this? Because, you know, now there's this big giant brain out there that some people are even afraid of, others don't know how to use it. And then, you know, in the dialogue between conscious and unconsciousness, awareness, lack thereof, automated thinking as opposed to conscious thinking, where does AI fit in all of this?
Yeah, there are two things I want to mention about AI that's really, really important. First of all, there's this fundamental truth that we all know that the external is actually a picture of the internal. So when you see things like AI, you know, developing on the external, that means that something has happened on the internal. So you have to ask yourself, what has happened in the internal that's, you know, resulted in AI on the external? So what happens is that the consciousness, and that's where we started really on, you know, consciousness on the external went up, and that's where we have the realization of it on the external is AI. AI is the manifestation of higher consciousness in the unseen. So that's the first answer. Then the second answer to AI is that AI is supposed to enable us to come out of the analytical. The reason why we are in the unconscious is the analytical. We spend hours, you know, sitting down, getting educated and, you know, listening to a teacher. We spend hours like that, institutionalized. And what that does is that, of course, we need the education. Of course, we need all that to contribute to society, but it actually makes a person become more unconscious and less even creative. So the AI takes care of the analytical thinking side and enables us, we humans, to then access the intuitive, creative side. And That is super important because it's the intuitive creative side that links us to the conscious, to the spirit, to the spiritual realm, not the analytical. We're using a small fraction of our existence to use only our analytical brain is a very small fraction of our total being. So AI is helping us to take care of the analytical mundane and cross over it more into the intuitive creative side and contribute that to humanity. And the good thing about, AI again is that the value of the human experience increases with technology. So now, because we have technologies that can manufacture and do things, if an individual creates something authentic from the heart, the value of that thing elevates. And the person sees that I can feel the heart in this. This is not AI. This is not computer. This is a human soul on this plate, for example, on this glass bowl. I want to buy it for $10,000. The value of human creation becomes elevated with artificial intelligence. And of course, artificial intelligence also helps us as a medium of also creating new ideas as well. So yeah, it's a very good leap in our advancement in technology, but also on the consciousness side, a very good leap on our consciousness side, our consciousness evolution.
That's a great perspective. Definitely never thought of it that way. Thank you for that. So, my favorite question I always love to ask our visionary guests is, if you could go back in time 25 years and speak to younger Peter with all of the knowledge and wisdom that you have today from your experiences, and share a few words of wisdom, something, what would you want to say to him? And the idea that, oh, the journey's been perfect, blah blah blah, that's not a good enough answer. What would be the counsel if you were going back to speak to that younger Peter and had the benefit of everything you know today? What would you share with him?
That's a good question. And the truth is that this question is an exercise that everyone should do. And it's part of getting conscious. So
Nice.
what I have realized profoundly is this in my journey, is that the journey is within. I always thought it was something to do external. I always thought it was something to achieve externally. Yes, there is, but that's secondary. The true journey is actually within. And that's what I didn't know back then. Reading and doing all this research is like, okay, going external, okay, I need that. Okay, like, what am I looking for? Until I realized that what I was searching for was always within me. That was what I was supposed to work on. All of us are on a journey of self-realization. We hid from ourselves in order to find ourselves. That's the reason why children instinctively play hide and seek, because the way we did it was as creative beings, we hid our true nature from our less creative side in order for our less creative side to find out who he is or who she is or what it is. So yeah, again, the secret sauce is this. I have realized that the journey is self-realization. The journey is internal. It's not projecting myself into other people's minds. What's the person thinking about me? What's that? No, it's internal. The journey is internal, being conscious and finding out who I am on the inside. So that's what I'll tell my, 21-year-old self, for example, like, no, this is what you need to do. You need to focus on building and reconnecting with your true self on the inside. You need to always dedicate time for the self, because and to love the self is not being selfish. Loving the self means that when a person truly understands that they are the creator of their own experience, you do not want to create a bad experience for yourself. That's what it means to love the self. I am the one creating my experience, and there is something called cause and effect. I do not want to create a negative experience for myself because I thought I gave it to a negative, thought form, and then it's going to come back to me. So because we understand that loving the self means that not just loving the personal self, but loving the whole self, because we are also the global self, not the localized self. And yeah, so two parts of it is, the local self and the global self, but the journey is actually within, not external.
Awesome. Love that, Peter. Thank you very much for your time. Final words, final guidance, a nugget, something you want to share with the entrepreneurs, those seeking a higher consciousness. What would you want to say to them as we wrap this up?
Oh, I'll say that the most important thing, if we want to be conscious, the first step to be conscious is compassion. Is when we're able to understand that when I see the other person, I realize that that person is actually doing their best with the knowledge they have. Like sometimes we see people and maybe they're doing something wrong or whatever. It's like, why is that person doing X, Y, Z? Because we have a better knowledge that we shouldn't do X, Y, Z. Not realizing that if we, the same energy, were in that person's body, avatar, we will be doing the exact same thing because we are all one thing expressing itself in multiple forms. So compassion enables us to really begin to see ourselves in every other one. And that's the one primary thing that makes us awaken. The one primary thing is I want to show compassion to everyone I meet because I want to understand where they are at. And if there's any way I can contribute to that individual's life from a consciousness perspective. Thank you, Ridley.
Thank you, Peter Luxruel. Really appreciate a very deep, profound conversation, something worth listening to multiple times. Groove Growth members appreciate the thought-provoking things that hopefully can wake a few more of us up to get on that journey, start reading, start listening, start paying attention to ourselves. And as you said, the journey is always within. And I deeply appreciate the time you've given us today. Peter, thank you very much. Look forward to doing that again sometime in the near future.
For sure. Thank you so much, Rosimano.